Hello. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Monday speaker series. I am Dr. Vinod Jain. I'm the Director of Speaker Engagement for 40 Plus of Greater Washington. For those joining us for the first time, 40 Plus is a non-profit organization dedicated to helping experienced professionals communicate their value and navigate career transitions successfully. If you're looking to build skills, expand your network, or give back, I encourage you to visit our website, 40plusdc.org, to learn more about volunteering and our career resources. Now, let's turn to tonight's program. We have a terrific speaker today. He'll be talking about accountability for career and leadership success with Mark Crouter. Mark is a friend of mine. He's a terrific coach, and I've benefited from that. So Mark is a career and leadership coach and coach program liaison with Delta Leadership Inc. He's a member of the International Coaching Federation and holds the Professional Certified Coach credential. He helps clients who are at a career crossroad to gain clarity and insight into their talents, priorities, and career options. In his earlier careers, Mark held technical and leadership positions at the Mitre Corporation and at two management and technology consulting firms, Impact Innovation Group and Booz Allen and Hamilton. Mark lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where he's active in the Raleigh area chapter of the International Coaching Federation. With that, Mark, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me all right.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this discussion on a topic that's of keen interest to me, based on my management and leadership experience, and as a coach as well. And I hope we'll have a few other people join, but if not, we'll just have this small, tight group, and we'll get a lot out of it, I hope. Um, Let me share my slides, and we'll go from there. All right. Should be able to see the title slide. Yeah. Before we start the presentation, I would like to just share a personal, if somewhat tenuous, connection with your organization. As a coach, I always try to find some connection between me and my clients. And I ran across some interesting 40 plus trivia. I did some research and I found out that when 40 plus was formed, the New York organization's very first advisory board consisted of four very well-known leaders. Tom Watson, who was the founder of IBM, of course, Norman Vincent Peale, the author of The Power of Positive Thinking, Arthur Godfrey. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember Arthur Godfrey on the radio and on television, and a guy named James Cash Penney, better known as J.C. Penney. And the reason I brought this up as a connection is that my grandfather actually knew J.C. Penney.
Hmm.
In the mid 20th century, Penny was not only a businessman, but he was also a dedicated farmer and a cattle breeder. And in the 20s, he wanted to improve the quality of American livestock herds, which was generally considered poor. And he purchased Emmeline Farm in New York and established a purebred Guernsey herd there. My grandfather was a well-known cattle breeder, dairy cattle specifically, and he lived at and managed Emmeline Farm for J.C. Penney. That's where my mother grew up. He had these prized Guernsey cows, and they were shown at the annual Dutchess County Fair and throughout New York, winning many prizes. And the barn you see in the background is where the cows were actually kept. So there's my connection to 40 plus through my grandfather and J.C. Penney. Um, whatever trivia that's worth. So let's talk about accountability. Um, it's a hot topic in business. And, if you or your direct reports or even your bosses struggle with accountability, you and they are not alone. It's a big topic that applies to many areas. And I hope you'll see some application in roles that you have or have had or may have. And we're going to dig a little deeper into it. Then we're going to have two breakout sessions where I'll ask you to put in your own context with examples from your own work and your own life. Okay? If we only have a few people, maybe we'll just do a breakout session of the five of us, and that should probably be okay too. I did some research in looking for recent articles on this topic. How do I know that it's a hot topic? Well, because there's so much being written about it. I found dozens in articles like Harvard Business Review and Forbes and SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, Human Capital Leadership Review, and even the Office of Personnel Management in the federal government. They had this compelling title. Accountability can have positive results. Ooh, gosh, I hope so. Otherwise, why would you do it? If you look on Forbes, it seems like they have an article practically every month. And furthermore, you can also look for videos. There's a vast array of videos. If you just do a Google search on videos on accountability, okay? And it's clear that just from the amount of things that people are preaching, it seems like an unmet need for managers and leaders. Okay. And my own interest in the subject actually goes back many years. Part of my uh, bio that Vinod didn't mention was I was a career Navy officer. And when I was a young Navy officer, that believe it or not, that's what I looked like 45 years ago when I was a pilot. I got some early leadership training, and it's stressed the importance of aligning these three related attributes: responsibility, authority, and accountability. And at the time, the training didn't actually make clear the distinctions of those three constructs, which made it kind of hard for me to understand the connections. And in the years since then, I've come to understand why I was confused. You see, the Navy has these 250 years of experience in aligning responsibility, accountability, and authority. So teasing out the differences wasn't at all obvious. When you realize that in the rest of life, organizations don't have that kind of culture, you start to see what happens when they're out of alignment. So I want to ensure that I'm not perpetuating that original mistake of lack of definition. So here's some useful definitions to keep in mind as we discuss accountability and those other related characteristics. So first, let's start with responsibility. When I think of responsibility, some words that come to mind are duty and commitment, task or expectations. In other words, responsibility is what you need to get done. Maybe it's in a job description. More often, it's something less formal, like an email requesting or directing you to do something, or even just a conversation where you took on some task. Maybe it's something that you've committed to just because you've declared an intention to get something done. So it's a commitment to yourself in some cases. It can be imposed externally, or it can be assumed internally. And it can be very formal or informal or a whole range of things in between. Later, we'll talk about how responsibility can be misunderstood through a lack of clarity. But for now, let's just speak of responsibility as what you're supposed to do. Okay? Second, authority. Authority is power, and power comes in many forms. It could be a state of permission that's legally recognized and accepted. For example, some of you may have stood in front of someone at some point in your life who said, "Now, by the authority vested in me by the state of North Carolina," or some such thing. And that person had the authority to change your marital status from single to married. In fact, I know of a couple who were actually married by the bride's uncle, who was an ordained minister from Missouri. But the marriage took place in Virginia. And what they didn't realize was Virginia doesn't automatically recognize the validity of marriage unless the officiant is actually registered as such in the state. So when the couple learned that, they actually had to go to the courthouse and get married again because it turns out that their wedding, or what they thought was their wedding, wasn't actually legal. So authority isn't something you can just claim by saying so. It's often advisable to actually check the credentials of somebody whose authority you're relying on. More often, authority is not just some legally recognized status, but rather the power to get something done. And usually that means the ability to control and direct the necessary resources. Okay. So if you take on an assignment, do you have the money, the equipment, the tools, the people, the skills, and the time to carry out that assignment successfully? Or to put it another way, how many of us have taken on a job only to realize we didn't actually have the resources to get it done? And we had to enlist others or ask for more time or get whatever it was we were lacking. So maybe you have the experience of giving someone an assignment while assuming, without maybe stopping to ask, whether they were actually capable and equipped to do the thing that was asked of them. That is their authority. Okay, it's not just some legal status, but do you have the power and do they have the power to actually get the thing done? Setting somebody up with a responsibility without authority is a recipe for failure. Okay, so that brings us to accountability. So when we speak of accountability, we're always speaking about consequences, or more explicitly, perhaps the ownership of consequences. We often think of accountability in terms of negative consequences or punishment, like someone being fired or demoted or passed over for a promotion or maybe experiencing some loss of status. But positive consequences are also a form of accountability, like being rewarded with a bonus or promotion or greater, guess what? Responsibility and authority. That's what comes to people who are successful and take accountability. So positive consequences can also include things like intangible outcomes, maybe an increase in trust, status, or reputation. Okay, I'm going to pause here just to see if anybody has a question or comment so far. All good? Okay,
Mark, I'll have a question.
sure.
So in a employment context, these things, how do they come together? Is that like when they get an employment letter, somebody would say, this is your responsibility, this is your authority, this is accountability, or when
You know,
does
I think
that?
I think it's yeah, I think it would maybe even before you get that offer letter,
Okay.
in the discussions that you're in when you're in a job interview, you know,
Mhm.
to understand what is the role that I'm being hired in for? What am I being asked to do?
Okay.
What authority will I have? Do I have people
Sounds
reporting to me? Will I have a budget? What kind of information will be available? Information is a key element of authority. If you don't have the information to do your job, where are you going to get it? Can you reach out to peers? You know, what's your boss's job potentially in terms of supporting your success? So authority is a matter of setting somebody up for success. And when you're looking at a new job, by the way, that's also true internally, not just in a job interview externally, but if you're being considered for a role internally in your own organization and somebody's,
Mhm.
saying, well, we could promote you next time around. Okay, what is that actually going to entail? Nobody wants to turn down a promotion, right? But I've known people who were promoted perhaps prematurely and didn't understand what they were getting into and maybe struggled at first and maybe even longer because they couldn't quite reconcile what am I allowed to do? What am I supposed to do? What am I not allowed to do?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Any other questions or comments? Okay, all right, let's continue then. I wonder if you've ever been in an organization where something like this happened. Okay, have you ever heard this phrase? Around here, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. What does that say about an organization? I think it says that authority is lacking and accountability is weak because permission is a form of authority. People are saying they don't have the authority to get their jobs done. And forgiveness is actually a weak form of accountability. If the consequence of exceeding your authority is standing in front of the boss and saying, gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I won't do it again, that's not much really in the way of accountability. Don't get me wrong, sometimes apologizing when we make a mistake is exactly what we should do. But I don't want to be in a place where that's actually preferred to getting permission or being clear about what authority is actually needed. Otherwise, the organization's really operating with a loss of clarity and a lack of transparency, and people are in effect forced to find workarounds instead of addressing the situation directly. Here's something that I actually like better. It's from a business consultant named Gary Nielsen, an author on business strategy. He says once people have a clear idea of what decision people should and should not be making, holding them accountable for decisions feels fair, right? You've got the clarity up front. You know what people should and shouldn't be doing, what decisions they're allowed to make, maybe not make. Maybe they have to consult with others. But the clarity is what sets people up for success and sets them up to take responsibility and the accountability for their actions. That's the kind of organizations that's matching authority and accountability, and the kind of organization I'd much rather work in than one where people have to ask forgiveness rather than get permission. So here's maybe a first takeaway. Accountability is consequences. No consequences equal no accountability. Okay? We'll come back to that. And in our breakout session, I'm going to ask you to think about maybe where there have been some mismatches between accountability and authority and where consequences have not been clear, or perhaps where they have been. So all three of these concepts have a common thread, and that's clarity. So where people in organization often struggle with results, it may be because of lack of clarity about responsibility, authority, and accountability. That's why armies of lawyers exist and are engaged every day in renewing contracts. Contracts exist to minimize the lack of clarity in formal agreements. And the more there is at stake, the greater the need for clarity. The same is true, I think, in everyday conversations and transactions. You don't have to be a contract lawyer to know that we're making agreements with one another all the time that are, in a sense, mini contracts. So that is part of the answer to why accountability is hard. The lack of clarity about what's supposed to be done or who has the power and resources to get it done, and what are the actual consequences of success or failure. Now, I mentioned I spent some time in the Navy. Um, I'm going to come back in a few minutes to ideas about how to achieve greater clarity, but just for contrast, I'm going to return to my Navy example for a couple of minutes. The classic example is the captain of a ship at sea. The captain has extremely broad responsibility, the duty to carry out any possible missions the ship may be tasked with, the safety and morale and well-being of the crew, safe navigation of the ship, and many others. And to go along with all that responsibility, the captain has tremendous authority, which has almost no equivalent in civilian life, I think. With their own crew, they can take whatever action is needed to ensure that they meet their responsibilities, as long as it's within the law, of course. They can administer what they call non-judicial punishment for minor infractions. They can even convene courts-martial for certain offenses, something we hope your boss would never have to do in civilian life. Um, to go along with that, the captain has almost unlimited accountability as well for everything that goes on aboard that ship. Every year, the Navy actually relieves a small number of commanding officers of their duties with essentially no administrative or legal review. It might be for a range of factors like poor leadership, personal conduct, or misconduct, or as serious as a collision at sea. And every CO knows this is the way it's done, and they accept that accountability as a condition of their position. Okay. And the rest of life, as I've learned, things are not so clear cut. And a lack of clarity often leads to misunderstandings and disappointing results, and sometimes worse. This is true even when all the parties involved have the best of intentions. And I always try to assume, and usually it's a good assumption, that people come to work with the intention of doing their best. Nobody sets out to be mediocre or to disappoint. And yet, nevertheless, managers, including many you may have worked with, continue to struggle to hold others accountable and sometimes even struggle with their own level of accountability. So I've got some ideas about how to deal with this problem, and I'm going to share them with you later. But before we do, I want to just have some exchange of ideas. I see there just aren't enough of us to make many breakout groups. And so, Gaddafi, I wonder if you agree if we could just have an open discussion among the four of us.
Oh, yes, I agree. You should do that. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. So I'd like to come up with our own examples. I've given you some Navy examples. I'd like to hear from your work experience and some possible breakdown in accountability. So examples are here on the screen, but not necessarily limited to that. And to have maybe a story that maybe somebody, maybe even you, missed a deadline or made a decision that didn't work out, or somebody made a commitment and they didn't follow through on it. It might be a workplace example, but it could also be something in your personal life. And if that happens, we'll just kind of make sure we don't use any real names. Okay. But there are times when all of us have looked at somebody else's actions and thought, what were they thinking? But again, they didn't come in expecting to be mediocre or disappoint anybody. And we're going to try to use a mental model to think about the circumstances. What lack of clarity might there have been in any of those dimensions: responsibility, authority, or accountability? And normally I'd set a certain amount of time for this, but I'm just going to say, since we're all together, we'll just listen to the discussion, and when we're done, we're done. Um, so let's open up our microphones. And if you're not on camera and you'd like to be on camera, that's fine. Um, What comes to mind when you think about the ideas that I've been sharing? Examples that could have happened in your own life or your work life?
This is the time where heavily encourage everyone who is in the line to really be candid and participative, because only through participation do we learn. And
So, but
uh,
no, you might have to start it off here, pal.
absolutely, yeah. No, I have a very good example. And uh, several years back, Mark, I was a project leader on $1 million project. There were three task leaders below me, and then there were subject matter experts who were helping our project. And one person, we gave him a responsibility that this is your role. And he seemed to say, fine, good.
Can you be a little more
But
specific? What did you
right,
understand you were
I think
assigning him?
we were doing an analysis of alternatives, and he was the technical lead. Uh, we said you are the technical lead for this task around analysis of alternatives, and I was the project lead. And so he seemed to say fine. He didn't question that. But when it came time to him delivering a game plan or a schedule or all of those things which are required of a task lead, he he didn't he didn't offer much. And I was puzzled. I was frustrated. Like, hey, you haven't said I have a problem with this role, and I expect these things from you. And so I had a conflict with this guy for a while, and I escalated it up that maybe he's not the right fit. Uh, but later I kind of learned that he just kind of went along and didn't say, oh, this role was right or wrong for him. And but he didn't truly agree in his heart that he's the right fit for that.
Hmm.
And so it was a learning lesson for me that when we pick people for specific roles, they have to agree, explicitly that they understand what is being asked of them and that they are ready to deliver when the time comes.
Yeah, it sounds like the person didn't ask what exactly is required of this role. Maybe you both assumed you knew the answer to that. What do you think?
I agree. I think I had a different view of what he was supposed to deliver, and he had a different view of what he was supposed to deliver. And we just made the assumption that he understands. And so I think your point about having accountability and clarity about roles and responsibility sometimes gets muddled when roles are assigned on teams. And if you don't have agreements, then things can mess up or leads to conflicts.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like there were at least two areas that we've talked about. One is the responsibility. It wasn't actually agreed upon what the specific role required and what success looked like, right?
Right,
And then even if you had, it sounds like there was some question whether that was the right person for that job.
right.
Even if the clarity of the role and the responsibility had been there, maybe the authority in the sense of whether they were prepared to do that job fully was not made clear.
And so later, by the way, we ended up giving him a different role which suited his skill set, and I ended up taking his responsibility
Yeah,
because I had skills in that area.
yeah. Okay. And so just to put a bow on it, what might you do differently if the same situation were coming up? Again, before the problem arose, but when you were setting up the situation.
Yeah, so in the future, I would have one-on-one conversation with a sit down saying, okay, let's go through these responsibilities you would have in this role.
Yeah.
Do you understand? Do you feel comfortable in taking on this work? Do you experience in this? uh, rather than assuming that because people have some stuff on their resume or you assume that they will be able to do. It's like getting that personal conversation where you explicitly show the person the responsibility and they nod or say explicitly, yes, I understand. Yes, I'll be ready.
Yeah, yeah. It might even be as specific as these are the deliverables and the deadlines and things. Again, you
Right.
might assume somebody has the same understanding you do, but then you find out they don't. Yeah, in the second part of the
Yeah.
presentation here, we'll talk about how to be better at that clarification process. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Uh, Gaddafi or Scott, any thing come to mind for you?
This is Lashina. I had something that I
Oh,
want.
oh, I see. It looked like Scott's name.
Oh,
No, no, no. Lashina. Go ahead,
Okay.
Lashina.
uh,
Go ahead.
the thing that I have, and perhaps I can get some ideas from the people on this call, is I'm increasingly finding accountability difficulties when I deal with customer service departments, and in particular, I'll be more specific. More recently, in a medical use case. I have a medication that I was expecting to get approved by an insurance company and get the medicine and, be on my way. So
Hmm.
I received a text message from I'll call it the pharmacy, saying, good news, your medicine has been approved. You can pick it up. Then I got like 10 minutes later another text message from the same medical pharmacy saying, we're still trying to get approval for this
Mm.
medication. Now, they had told me before they were trying to get approval. So I got two mixed messages that came in pretty much at the same time.
Mhm.
So then I got a phone call from somebody from the same pharmacy saying, good news, your medicine has been approved. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I just got two text messages that were kind of giving me a mixed message. I was gonna,
Contradictory. Yeah.
yeah, contradictory. So that particular person that called me on the phone said, oh, let me take a look at the notes. And then she came back and said, oh, yeah, you're right. There are still some approvals required.
Yeah.
And I said, I wish there was somebody that was accountable for these particular, call it text messages, call it notifications, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
And so, anyway, long story longer, as my cousin would say,
Yeah.
uh, we still don't have an answer. So, I'm looking for, in that sense, Mark, what kind of accountability process would you um, suggest?
Well, once you've had that experience, you know what questions to ask that you assumed you didn't need to ask before, right? And just having no particular experience with that organization, all I can suggest is some version of not just what are you telling me, but how do you know? What's the basis for saying that? Is the bottle sitting there waiting for me at the counter if I show up? No, no, we haven't got that yet. Okay, well, call me when the bottle's ready. Maybe
Yeah,
something more
yeah,
concrete than just a
yeah,
text message. I don't know how that would work in that situation.
yeah.
You don't want to be in the like let me talk to your manager, right? But if you have a question about process, you don't blame the person who's at the wrong end of the process and can't do anything about it. They may not have the authority to fix the problem. So if it happens more than once, you say, this seems like it's happening a lot, and I'd like to just make you aware of what I'm seeing so that if there is a way to address it, you're aware of it, and we escalate it to the person who can actually make a change in the process, the quality assurance or the communications or wherever the breakdown was, without trying to be the analyst of what broke down and why. Escalate it to the point where you're talking to somebody who will take the responsibility to look into it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think escalating to someone who does have the responsibility and is accountable,
Yeah.
um, that that would take on that task. So,
Yeah, but
and
but
I
not
think
with the
there's
idea of not with the idea of blaming the clerk. That's not what we're here for, right?
no, this was not definitely not at a clerk level. This was at
Yeah.
a higher level because this
Yeah.
had to go through an approval process. But
Yeah.
I think you're right, and I think, according looking at the previous example with the person that didn't take the responsibility, I think there's a relationship between process and accountability as well, you know.
Yes, yes, there is, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit. There's more to it than just what I'm going to touch on, but I would say that when it gets into setting up understandings or misunderstandings, um, I think we tend to make assumptions more than we ought to. And again, if it breaks down once, maybe that's just a bad example. If it's happening two or three times in the same organization, there's a process problem. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Good call. Yeah. Anyone
And
else?
we have Louise on the in the attendee list. Louise, hope you're doing well. You are part of our leadership team, and you have worked in the government sector. Any examples which stand out for you?
Oh my. Good evening. Well, a couple of them, what resonated to me was sort of some of the competing authority between the contractor boss and sort of the government boss. So
Oh,
things would
yeah.
get held up even though there was agreement on, and I was on the government side, even though we had agreement on the government side, the contractor would have to go to their organization to clear it first, and that would cause a delay in the product. And I'm thinking, I always think, well, the client comes first, or that, I always that was sort of my working rule. But I did encounter a couple of situations where we would defer to the contract side, and it was a bit confusing.
Yeah, without naming names, of course, you heard from my bio that I've worked for three different government contracting organizations over my career, so I can relate to that very clearly. And like Vinod, I've been a project leader, and I've also been not in the contracting side of it, but having to understand every contractor works under a contract, right? What does it say they can do and can't do? And what do they need approval from the COTAR or the contracting officer or whatever it might be? So when you've experienced that frustration, Louise, something either had been allowed to develop or was sort of contractually limited that caused people to sort of guard their vulnerability, I'm guessing, right? Um, and I can, having been on the contractor side of the table, and when I was in the military, a little bit on the government side of the table, um, I can understand that somebody asks you to do something, if you're not really sure what it's going to cost, what's expected, how long you have to get it done. You want real clarity as a contractor before you commit to something because you don't want to let your client down, and you also don't want to lose money doing it.
Right, right. And sometimes there were also barriers like essentially something was done. Let's say, it was an article for a newsletter, and it had been approved by the government principal and everybody on the government side, but yet, and it wasn't sort of stated in the contract, and or it wasn't, I guess, clear from the get-go that with certain pieces they were going to go back and seek approval from their leadership. That
Before it was
wasn't,
published. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was made
Right.
clear at the beginning of the contract, and something I don't know that I would have ever thought of to put in a contract.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to publish something and then have somebody have to retract it or something. I mean, I can sort of understand why people might want to at least be consulted before some announcement goes out. If it put them on the hook for something. Um, but again, it sounds like, hey, let's get a process for doing this, and the next time it'll be a little smoother because this wasn't.
Right, right.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a good example. Yeah. Very a lack of clarity again, right?
Yeah.
Who's
Or,
got
or
the what are we going to do and who's got the authority to approve it on both sides?
exactly. And when and under what circumstances?
Right.
Is
Under
this
what
every
conditions? Yeah.
product or just a few?
Yeah. Yeah. That can get very legalistic, literally. Good.
I'm going to invite our attendee Mark. Mark, have you been a previous speaker with us, or could you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what do you do and how do you look at this issue?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I have not been a speaker. I have been an attendee on several occasions, enjoying the presentation so far. Apologies, I joined a little late, was having some issues with Zoom on my side, but I did get in, which is good. And definitely is a relevant kind of topic. I was thinking with one of the comments here about experiences I've had locally with ISPs, internet service providers, support reps, making promises which later are reversed, going through the management kind of chain, only to either not get calls back or get calls back saying that what was agreed upon was not possible to move forward. So that kind of seconds what one of the comments that we had or questions discussions that came up earlier. As far as accountability, oh, and you asked what I do. I'm a systems engineer in the
Hmm.
DC metro area. So
Mhm.
Hmm.
consulting on that side. I've been on the other side as well in the past. But yeah, enjoying this topic and holding individuals and holding ourselves accountable is something that, certainly and communicating clearly is something that makes everything work better. So
Yeah.
thank you for holding this and appreciate the content so far. Looking forward to the rest.
Well, I appreciate your example, and if you don't mind my just probing a little bit, um, when you learned that the ISP wasn't able to do what you thought they had committed to do, what consequences were there, and what options did you consider?
Well, I switched. Ultimately, the final decision was after 20 plus years with one provider to switch to a different provider.
There you
So,
go. That's the consequence for them. The consequence for you was you weren't going to put up for another year.
yeah, yep.
Yeah, you were
After
going to take the
after
risk of switching.
10 hours of calls and trying to work things out, trying to get something that was agreed upon, ultimately there was a certain hassle to switching to another internet service provider,
Yeah, there's a
equipment
cost.
wise
Yeah,
and whatnot, but yeah, there's a point where I mean, as a company, they need to look at customer acquisition costs,
sure. And customer
offering,
retention. If it's like some companies I've worked with, they would maybe counter with like, oh,
yeah,
okay, what if we gave you another year at half price, or
yeah.
something to try to keep you, right?
What and Mark, they did that, and
Yeah,
it was something that I said, hey, this is great, let's move forward with it. And a transfer later, and that was reversed.
yeah,
So after three of those and going back and forth and saying that it just wasn't going to work, it wasn't worth it. And the internet speed was a little bit slow, but anyway, so long story
that
short,
wasn't the problem though. It was
no,
the
no, it
problem was
wasn't.
lack of responsiveness of the provider.
Yeah. And yeah, and not only, I mean, we can talk about turnover in staff or customers, the customer acquisition or the cost of bringing in a new person to a position. I forget the figure that I used 5 or 10 years ago. It's 2 or 3 times their salary, the cost to the company to bring somebody in, get them trained up to speed, not just with the skills but the people that they need to work with, and
Yeah,
and that adds up. So yeah.
yeah. Okay, yeah. So there were some consequences for you and some consequences for them, and that's what companies and people have to count on and deal with. It's hard. Just getting your way isn't always possible. Yeah. Any
Mark, do you
other?
have more time on this breakout session
I
or
think we could take another example if somebody's got one. Yeah.
all right. If nobody raised hand, anybody can jump in, but I'll ask a question which is very important to a lot of our audience members generally. In this whole process of this employment where companies put a ad, hundreds of people apply to that. A lot of people feel like their application has gone into a black hole. Sometimes the people hear from the organization, sometimes they don't hear from the organization, sometimes the role was not there at all. It was just a kind of a phony placement.
Yeah.
Seems like that process of accountability often breaks down between a employer who's trying to hire and people who are trying to get that position. And I hear many horror stories where people say, I've sent so many resumes, often I don't hear what happened to my resume or whatever.
I know that's very frustrating. As you said in your intro, I do career counseling and career coaching.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah,
I hear that in many different forms and the frustration that goes with it. I'm going to telegraph a point I'm going to make a little later in the presentation,
yeah.
and it'll bear repeating, which is just because you think somebody's accountable doesn't mean they are. And
Mm,
it's perhaps paradoxical. I'm just going to say it this way, and you'll see it again in a few slides. You can't hold somebody accountable for something they haven't actually agreed to be accountable for, as
mm.
much as you might like to. Okay.
Nice.
And assuming that somebody's accountable is only in your power if you have the ability to impose the consequences that
Mm,
go along with that accountability, right? So the resumes and the applications go in what seems like a black hole. You don't get your phone calls returned. Having been on the hiring side, maybe not in the kind of environment we're in now, I can understand why, recruiters might be overwhelmed and not be able to do that. But they never
right.
agreed that they would answer your letter. They never agreed they would return your phone call, right? So accountability in this case is the wrong term. Um,
But I think in this situation, Mark, if they were to sort of put out a FAQ to the people who are applying, like, hey, please understand, here are our sort of rules of engagement,
Our constraints, yes. Here's what we
right,
can
or
do and what we can't
constraints,
do. Yeah,
right. We
that's a way of
will,
sort of telegraphing what you're accepting as your
right,
responsibility. It'll be our
right.
responsibility to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think something like that would make it very helpful for respondents who say, okay, they have already told us. They will respond if they can,
yeah,
or if needed, or this is how to read a situation
right.
where if they don't
Yeah,
hear, right?
yeah, yeah. I think it goes back to that organizational culture that we mentioned. An
Right.
organizational culture that wants to be known for its transparency, that wants to be known for its clarity, is going to adopt methods like that. I just happen to think it's an analogy, but last time I was in my doctor's office, the nurse came in, took my vital signs, and she said, the doctor will be with you in just a few minutes. And she left. And there's a little hang tag on the back of the door that she had gone out of that
Hmm.
basically says, if you're here 15 minutes and nobody has spoken to you,
Hmm.
let us know.
Oh,
That was their commitment, right?
right.
You're entitled to hear back from us in less than 15
Right.
minutes if you're
Perfect
wondering.
example, right? Yes,
Right.
that's taking ownership
Yeah.
of that process. So sounds
Yeah.
good.
Then
Thank you.
you know what your limitations are.
I
Right.
need that doctor's office.
Okay, well, as Vinod said, I live in Chapel Hill and I go to UNC Health because they're right down the hill, right down the street, and they're a very good provider, and I've been very happy with them. So anybody who lives in the North Carolina area, there's a good example. Great. Okay, so thank you for those. Any other ideas anybody wants to share, or shall we go on?
I think
Okay.
move on, Mark. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Um, Let me go back to my slides for a second. Um, just to think about those stories, we've kind of touched on all of these already, and this was a sort of a slide I was going to put up when you were in the breakout group, if we'd had any. Just looking at them, I think we've kind of covered these for each of the cases.
Right.
But if something like that comes up again, look for where the lack of clarity is. Is it in the responsibility? Is it in the authority? Is it in the consequences? Yeah. Okay. Um, so I'm going to switch topics a little bit. It might seem like a switch, but we're going to come back to it. And it's one of the things that I've learned is very valuable for reducing that lack of clarity, for increasing clarity. And I'm going to talk about speech acts, which is a term specifically about how to make more effective agreements. And one of you used the term promises. So somebody made a promise. Well, a promise is a form of agreement. Some of you may be aware of speech acts already. I got this in a leadership training curriculum that I was in several years ago. But if the topic is new to you and you want to delve more deeply into these topics as a manager, as a leader, I recommend you pick up one or both of these books, starting with Chalmers Brothers here on the left with Language and the Pursuit of Happiness, and his co-author Vinay Kumar, language in the pursuit of leadership excellence. Some of the same ideas are in both. And that's where I'm getting most of this information. So some key aspects of speech acts. Speech acts are a number of different types of acts, and the key concept in the ties speech acts together is that language is fundamentally about action rather than just communication. Language is generative. It's what makes things happen. It's not just descriptive. And there are 6 fundamental types of speech acts listed here. We're only going to focus on one, which is making effective requests, which is results in clearer agreement. Okay? Many people make requests daily in various settings, some casual, some very formal. In that respect, requests are precursors to responsibility. That is what we need to get done. And to maximize the effectiveness of requests, consider the following 6 elements. A committed speaker and a committed listener. The speaker and the listener must be present and attentive and ready to engage in the request fully. If you don't have somebody's attention or they don't have your attention, you're going to perhaps think you've reached an agreement or had an effective request, and you really haven't because somebody was on their phone or reading their email and off screen or whatever it might be. It seems like a simple thing, but it's not always. I think, Vinod, you mentioned I would have a one-on-one with that person in order to clarify it, right? So that's where having a speaker and listener that's committed. Okay. When you have those discussions about what's expected, are you clear about what the future action is, what the conditions of satisfaction are, and the time frame? So it's important to clearly define the actions that are desired, the standards for satisfaction, or what success looks like. Let's talk about it that way. And then when the requested action should be completed. It's easy to make assumptions that the other person understands that, or that we're making an assumption that the other person agrees with. It's not always the case. And again, it's a consistently obvious area for improvement of clarity. We talk about the mood and the context of the request. That's a little bit subjective, but understanding that the emotional state of the speaker and the listener actually affect how they view what's being requested or what they are requesting. Okay. And so, what context are we in? Do we have a shared context about the terms that we use? You mentioned technical lead or task leader. Does that mean the same thing to them as it meant to you? It sounds like maybe it didn't. But the context of that is how well you understand the situation you're in and how much of a shared understanding and history you already have. Again, the context can also be what history do you have with that person? Have they been consistent about meeting your expectations and coming back for clarification if needed? Or has there been an experience where you've got prior misunderstandings? Okay. A little more detail on that idea of conditions of satisfaction, because that's where many misunderstandings often occur. Some people need a lot of specific direction and some need very little. I sometimes say, and as a career coach, I would hear people tell me, what do you least like about your job? I don't like to be micromanaged. And I would always tell them micromanagement is in the eye of the beholder. How general or specific you need to be when making a request and specifying those conditions of satisfaction is very situational. It depends on the history you have with the other person, their experience, the stakes involved, how important it is that you get it right the first time, or can you make corrections and course corrections? What's the fallback or contingency plan if the conditions of satisfaction aren't met? As you expect them to be. And then that could be a source of some rich discussion when we talk about these examples you've given later and how we might do them, experience them better. Okay. So, excuse me 1 second, there we go. Incomplete requests can be a major source of frustration and misunderstanding. And I'm just going to very briefly give you some examples of what makes requests incomplete. Vague instructions. Again, are you using the same terminology? Do you understand what's meant by this report or the information or that problem? Assuming prior knowledge, right? Maybe you're assuming somebody knows something that they don't actually know. And you know what? If there's a power differential in the two people, they may be very reluctant to ask for that, to admit that they don't have the knowledge or the information that you assume they have. And so it's okay to get that confirmation. The lack of context. End of day. What does end of day mean? 5 o'clock before you go to sleep tonight? On my desk at 8 o'clock in the morning? Those even those little details can cause some misunderstanding and some frustration, and then not being specific about the requirements. So I think we talked about some of those when we were giving our examples. So I'm not going to dwell on them further unless somebody has an example they'd like to offer.
Um, hmm. Yeah, I think these are frequent sources of um, confusion between a manager and somebody who's doing the work.
Yeah, or even with a peer.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Or-
and go ahead, Mark. You're
yeah.
saying something?
I said, or even with a peer. It doesn't have to be a direct report or a subordinate. It could be a colleague you need some assets from or some help with.
This is Louise. I can think of another one from the editorial
Right.
process. If we had to move something through clearance because, the last thing, with competing priorities and demands anybody wants to do sometimes is review something. But
Yeah,
we would sometimes add at the bottom, if we don't hear in 3 business days, we're moving on, or
that's
we'll
it.
assume you agree, or something like that. I don't know if that's, you know, I don't know that that's the most effective practice. I just know that we did that.
Yeah, if it works, it's effective. Yeah, I mean, it depends what results you're getting. If you're getting the right results, yeah. If somebody comes back afterward and said, "Hey, I was on vacation, I didn't get it." Okay, maybe we need 3 business days or some clarity. But it sounds like it worked for you.
I mean, I can think of some of we would prepare material for um, our boss to do like a town hall, and somebody who got back from vacation after the deadline would try to add to it, and that was really frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. No, sorry, the deadline's passed. We'll pick you up next time. Again,
Yeah,
that's a consequence. You have a choice of administering. What's
yeah,
the consequence if that happens? Do you stop the process or do you just go forward? That's a management decision.
yeah.
Yeah. I remember in the military, anybody who have a military background or have worked with the military might know this. Um, there was a specific abbreviation that we would use in naval message traffic, UNODIR. UNODIR stood for unless otherwise directed, right? So you were putting your boss on notice that you were telling your boss what you were going to do unless otherwise directed. And if you didn't hear back, and often it was like you didn't have to say unless otherwise directed by tomorrow. The boss just knew. It's like if I get this message and I want to stop the train, I got to do it right now. Otherwise, I trust my subordinate do what they say they're going to do. So that was a very well known, that's context. In the Navy, everybody gets what unodear means, you know. You don't have to explain it. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you for that.
And Mark, one other comment I'd like to make is that nowadays, as a coach myself, I often end my emails or communications like I put sounds good. Whatever am I proposing, I'm asking the question, are we on the same page? Do you understand? Do you get it? So give them a chance to chime, like whatever I'm asking, whatever I'm proposing, does that sound good to them?
Yeah, yeah. And to go a little further, even in terms from responsibility to authority,
Hmm.
um, you might ask again if it's somebody you don't work with much or you don't have much of a relationship to go on. You might say, "Is there any reason you wouldn't be able to get this done? Is there anything that you need from me to make sure you're successful?" You can tell them you're not making them walk the plank. You're actually there to put the safety net out there and help them be successful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I have a feeling that you get a lot of clients who are frustrated in their jobs and looking to get out or find other jobs. And my experience is that if these challenges around somebody making a request, other person not understanding, if it happens repeatedly, then there is a breakdown in trust and people throw their hands and say, I don't understand this guy's accent. He doesn't listen. When I ask for clarification, I don't get clarification. So their morale goes down. There's a breakdown in communication, and boom, next thing you know,
Yeah.
somebody says, you know what, I gotta leave this job.
Yeah, I have certainly experienced that on the job. I think sometimes it's from a lack of willingness to extend yourself um, and to take the risk that somebody might think you're micromanaging them when all you're doing is
Mm,
getting clarity. It's a very fine line and very subjective. That's why I
right.
say it depends on the person a lot. Yeah. So some
Sounds
symptoms.
good.
We think about
Good.
how people might get in these situations, right? And we're all human. We talk about, like what are the priorities? What are the time constraints? We assume that there's a shared understanding when there isn't time to actually clarify and verify that we do have a shared understanding. When if you could just take 90 seconds or so to confirm it, you could save hours of rework later. But we make the assumption that it's all understood. Not knowing what we don't know, or not knowing what the other person doesn't know, is a lack of awareness. And then there may be technical difficulties. And when I think about that, I think about are we using the right medium to convey our requests or to respond to requests? Email, very convenient, but honestly, there's no nuance in it, right? You read the words and you don't really know what the tone of voice is or the urgency. And are we reluctant to pick up the phone and call or walk down the hall if we're in the same office building and actually get clarity in person, which can make a huge difference, as many of us, I'm sure, have experienced. It's like, oh, that's what you meant. Yeah. So technical difficulty can include things like, am I even using the technology well to make or respond to this request? And so when you understand these symptoms and recognize them, you can handle incomplete requests much more effectively, whether you're the one making the request or especially when you're the recipient of such a request. Okay. And the way to do that is to make sure you ask clarifying questions and give the other person the opportunity to ask clarifying question, rephrasing the request and perhaps using your own language to make sure that what you heard was what the person intended and vice versa. And then enough detail. Again, even maybe over specifying the detail at first until you're clear that the person really shares that context with you and knows what the level of detail is that's needed. The great thing about making clear requests is that it actually fosters connection and opens opportunity for collaboration, whereas not providing that detail may shut off those opportunities. Um, in SpeechAct's theory, there are multiple ways to respond to a request, and too often we limit our responses to the obvious ones. If you respond with a yes, or the other person responds with a yes, it's like, I understand, I'm going to comply, it's going to get done. It is actually possible to say no. And sometimes you can decline a request because if you actually don't believe that it can be fulfilled or you've been asked to do something that's unrealistic. Again, with a power differential, that's very hard to do sometimes. It's hard to say no. And especially like people like me that want to say yes because we feel good about taking on responsibility and we want to show what we can do. But if we're not sure, maybe like the person who took on the responsibility you described, Vinod, maybe it would have been better if they'd said, "I'm not sure if I'm the right person for that. Can we get some clarification?"
Yeah.
And too often we miss the opportunity to do one of the next two things, either a counter offer, right? If I don't think I can do this, maybe I can do that. Would it be okay if such and such gets done? Okay, if I
Mm.
can't get it done by the end of the day, do you really need it by the end of the day, or could I have, tomorrow to finish it? I really feel like I could do a much better job if I didn't have to rush. Would that be all right? Sometimes deadlines turned out to be completely artificial or self-imposed, but we never asked the question, right? Or if you can do part of it. I can get step one done, but then I need to come back and check and see, if I'm on track. Would that be okay? Rather than accepting the entire, end-to-end job, let's get an opportunity to do some in-progress checks here, if that makes more sense. And then there's the idea of you can commit to commit. You can say, I can't really commit right now because of the other stuff on my plate. How about if I get back to you first thing tomorrow and we can discuss it again and decide how to go forward? So many of us have more flexibility to respond to requests than we actually exercise. And remember to give the people that you're requesting things of, subordinates, peers, whoever it might be, give them the opportunity to make a counteroffer. Give them the opportunity to make a commit to commit if that's appropriate, if you have the latitude to do it. Sometimes you don't, I understand, right?
By the way, I was saying to you, Mark, I think our chat, like it happens between husbands and wives. Wife says, honey, do that. She doesn't tell like what exactly she wants to done.
Right,
And then husband does it.
right.
And then husband has said, well, you didn't do what I asked you to do.
Or what's the real deadline? In
Yeah,
my marriage, it's like, okay, I'll get that done, no problem. I don't say when I'm going to get it done, and then the
right,
next day it's like, have you done that yet? Well,
right.
right. We didn't get clarity, right? We just understood. So I've learned to actually do that. You're right, in my own marriage, rather than experience that lack of clarity and that frustration that can occur. Just be clear up front. Say, yeah, I can do that. How about, end of the week? Would that be enough? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
good. Yeah. No, no, no. Those plants have to be watered today. They're getting dry.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Um, so some ideas about maybe how to continue getting that clarity and responding. Which of those response, sort of modes you want to take on? Do you understand the request? Do you understand what you're requesting? Do you understand what you're being requested to do? If not, be clear. Obviously, be respectful, whether you're the requester or the requestee. Have some flexibility and understand when flexibility is needed to actually respond and to get a clear agreement about what's going to be done. Okay. Um, I've had to learn myself that saying yes reflexively is not a good habit. Again, I can be a people pleaser. It's an easy one to get into, especially if your personality is, like I said, I like taking on responsibility. I want people to feel like I'm capable and will do what's asked. So I might respond reflexively. Yeah, I'll get it done. Or maybe you're the kind of person that's inclined to avoid conflict or afraid that declining a request or negotiating some different agreement might be damaging your relationship in some way. But how much more damaging is it to take on a responsibility and then find out you can't fulfill it, you know? Or maybe you're just one of those people that wants to appear super capable and you end up overcommitting or taking on more than it's reasonable. Again, looking at the uh, sort of seniority and wisdom in the group today, I'm sure all of us have experienced that at some time or other because we're successful people, right? Maybe you just need to have some more practice at some of these other possible responses. And what you really want to avoid, I think, is what I've come to call commitment regret. How many times have you regretted making a commitment, but feel once you've made it, there's no way to back out or change the terms, and then you just regret making that commitment and wished you'd actually taken the time to be clearer about what you could do or what you couldn't. And again, especially we find in the workplace that power differentials exist, and ensuring that the agreement is reached, it needs to be genuinely voluntary and made with an understanding of the receiver's context, or you might be setting them up for failure or unrealistic expectations. So I mentioned this before, and it bears repeating. You can't hold someone accountable for something they didn't agree to be accountable for. If you never really had a meeting of the minds, if you never really reached an agreement about what was expected, what the conditions of satisfaction were, and what the consequences were, you may be trying to catch quicksilver. Um, and I've gotten some pushback on this from some people. I'm curious what your all's kind of response is to this. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you couldn't say no, but you didn't want to say no? I mean, you didn't want to say yes?
Uh, who is here? Louise or Mark, do you have a comment?
I was going to say there's that power differential again.
Yes. Yeah. But even as a boss, I'm telling you to do this. Well, if I don't have a choice, I haven't really committed to it. All I've committed is to taking orders,
Hmm.
you know. I've committed to try, but I haven't committed to get it done because you haven't given me the option to agree, even where there's a power differential. But that's exactly what happens, Louise. Exactly. We assume because we have the power that we can assume that someone will get it done or accept the consequences.
And some employees, Mark, they don't go back and ask for clarifications because they're afraid that by asking those clarifications, they will look bad
Hmm.
or they would look like they should have gotten it clear the first time around.
Yeah.
Like with maturity, you understand that it's better to ask a second time or even a third time rather than fail at the end.
Right. Which is why, as managers and leaders,
Right.
we need to set that example. We need to model that behavior and give them an opportunity to do that so they don't have to feel that way. And if you haven't thought of it that way, you might not just automatically do that. Sometimes it needs to be very much intentional to set this up so that an agreement that's reached really does constitute a meeting of the minds, and the lack of clarity has been reduced as much as possible.
Well, and
Yeah.
that common understanding of what it looks like when it's finished as well, and checking in regularly because things do change as you're going through. Other priorities kind of come up, adjusting for that.
Hmm.
So it is an ongoing kind of process.
Yeah, yeah. Even to the point of, okay, this is what's on my plate now. What do you want me to defer?
Yep.
Right? What does this take the place of in the things I'm already taking responsibility for? Yeah, yeah. A reasonable question. But again, if the culture doesn't support you asking that question, it's really hard. Really hard. So as leaders, it's important we establish that culture if we have the latitude to do so. Um, Great. Um, a little bit of a digression, but I think you'll see how it applies. We all have to actively manage our commitments and the commitments of the people that report to us. In fact, as a coach, when I work with clients about time management, which is a very common issue for many managers, and one that relates directly to accountability, I often try to remind them that time management is really commitment management. You manage your time by managing your commitments and being more thoughtful and selective about how you commit your time. And the great result of actively managing your commitments is that it strengthens trust and supports accountability because we're less likely to disappoint others or ourselves. Okay? So whether you're making a request or receiving one, or if someone you work with is wrestling with their accountability or the accountability of others, here's kind of a takeaway slide, right? Be aware that a request is being made if it's not explicit. Be aware of what's expected. Consider what it's going to take to fulfill a request. Do you have the tools and authority? Does the person have the full range of means and power to get done what they need to get done? Be clear about the consequences. And then, if you need to be selective about making commitments that are realistic. Okay. Again, that idea that I mentioned about what's on my plate now. Is it realistic to accept more, or do I need to really renegotiate something? Being willing to renegotiate. Um, Now, this would be the point where we'd probably go into a second breakout group. But again, because we're all talking together, I just ask you to think about, in light of this idea of making effective requests and agreements, this idea of speech acts, we've talked about what makes an effective request, how to reach an agreement where you really have a meeting of the minds, that's shared context. Any other thoughts from the examples you gave, or maybe even other examples that have come to you about any of the questions that are on this slide? Can you think about being more specific about clarity that was needed in making the request or reaching an agreement? Can you come up with potential responses that might have been possible and whether or not they were considered? How could we actually have improved accountability for any of those examples that you gave earlier? Think about that and tell me what you'd like to share.
Louise or Mark, go ahead if you have a thought. I don't want to hog the time, but any,
Oh, I was going
yeah.
to say I could speak to bullet three and some of the examples that I mentioned. So again, not sure this is the best practice, but if we didn't get the info we needed or wanted to be sure we got the info we needed, we copied, CC'd the government leader. And I tried to use that sparingly, but that was always the ultimate in we need it and we need it now, or you
Hmm.
didn't comply in the first place. And I think it's something to be used sparingly, but it is effective. It gets the answer you want.
So you mentioned CCing. So that tells me it was done in email, right?
Yes, yes,
So that's
all these examples, yeah, are
right. So
email.
that's one of the ways in which accountability is improved by putting things in writing. Then you have the
Yep,
actual words that were used, and if there's a question about the words, people can come back and question or clarify what's in writing. Much easier, well, maybe not easier, but much less open to interpretation than a conversation where people don't necessarily agree or remember what was said, right?
right.
Yeah, so there's a time and a place for conversations in the hall, and there's a time to put it in writing. And even after a conversation in the hall, you think you've come to an agreement, being able to follow up with that written memo or email that says, "Here's what I understand you asked. Here's what I have agreed to. Do you agree?" Or vice versa, if you're the person making the request. So just having it in writing, and then the CC is kind of an additional layer of, and I'm making sure that the person we both report to knows this.
Right. You know,
Right. Yeah. And you're right. It doesn't need to be used all the time. It depends on the track record, the level of complexity, what's at risk, what's really at stake if something gets misunderstood and something falls through the crack, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
and
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
no. I'm reading a comment from Mark. Mark says, makes me think of the value of the agreement to a RACI table, responsible, accountable, consultant, informed.
Hmm.
And I think organizations try to develop these RACI tables so that people kind of understand what their accountability is or who is responsible or who is just being informed. So that's an example
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
right.
It's a good one, especially if it's used well. I've seen them put together and not really followed. Somebody puts it together because they said they needed a RACI chart, but they never go back and actually say what is the level of accountability and are we still clear about the responsibility? Just putting an R in the table doesn't mean that it's clearly understood, but it says who's got to
Right.
own that process. Yeah, so that can be very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mark, in the coaching community, there is this idea about having a written agreement between a client and a coach
Mm-hmm.
before one starts coaching sessions,
Mm-hmm.
precisely for the importance of these concepts that people need to understand the rules of the engagement
Mm-hmm.
and with their signature kind of agree that there's a fairly good understanding of what's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And to be clear about here's what I can offer,
Right.
whether you're saying that as a coach or a peer or whatever it might be, um, eh, offers are a version of effective request, except it's a request that is kind of it's the mirror image of a request when you make an offer. You're not actually making a request. You're saying, here's what I can do. If you accept my offer, then we have an agreement. So that's a little bit of a nuance in the Speech Act's idea. If the initial offer comes from somebody who is the person who wants to provide a service or fill a role or whatever it might be, it still requires clarification to come to an agreement and a meeting of the minds, which I've used that term before. But again, it's a term that lawyers use when they talk about developing contracts. And we don't want all of our requests and agreements to have to be, put into contractual language. But in effect, every agreement you make on the job is a mini contract. And to be able to be as rigorous as you need to be about establishing those elements of satisfaction. The more you do that up front, the less you're likely to have breakdowns, and the easier it'll be every time to develop those understandings without having to be as legalistic about it. But when you start doing this initially, if you're trying to fix a problem of clarity and understanding, it can sound like you're being more legalistic than you maybe mean to be. And so I've experienced this myself to be able to say, I want to make sure we're avoiding some misunderstandings. Last time I feel like maybe we didn't do as good a job about getting clarity up front. So I'm gonna actually do a little more rigor in establishing this understanding now. I hope you don't think that that means there's any lack of trust. I just want to make sure we're both clear before we go any further. So it's important to be able to articulate that as a leader and a manager so that people don't think, oh, where's this suddenly coming from? Doesn't he trust us? Doesn't she trust us? That's not the message you want to send.
And how would you adjust this for different reports? I mean, everybody responds differently. I mean, I'll circle back and say that, in previous kind of roles, I would, initially it was a conversation, then it would escalate to, a little bit more. Then there would be that CC step at the end. And then there were formal processes, which, up front, I indicated that I didn't want to go. I was trying to find alternate kind of approaches, but curious how you approach everybody's kind of response or styles being different.
Yeah, it's hard to give a very specific answer to that because it is very situational. But I would say the general approach I would take, again, based on my experience, both as a manager and as a leadership coach, is to approach the situation with curiosity. And that means questioning your own assumptions that you might be making and not making those assumptions clear, and being curious about what the other person understands, being curious about what the other person expects, maybe expects from you, what being curious about what they understand to be the limits of their authority or the range of their authority. And being curious is, again, it can be personality dependent how it comes across and how you express it, right? But being openly curious gives you the sense that you are willing to ask questions that you don't know the answers to, even if somebody thinks you ought to. And so being curious with person A, you're going to get some different answers than you would get with the same request with person B. And so assuming that you know what those answers are is a breakdown. It's a mistake. So be willing to have an open-ended clarification discussion in the first place, um, and and be willing to explore what you assume to be true and verify that it is. That's kind of the best general answer I can come up with on the spur of the moment. But anybody else have anything you'd like to add to Mark's question? I don't know, Mark, what do you think? Does
I
that
think,
help?
yeah, that does. Appreciate that. I mean, it's not an easy question to answer, and it's, case by case. Certainly appreciate your insight there. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, like I say, I mean, you don't want to get trapped in your own assumptions, right? That's the starting point is you think you know what you know, and you may not know what you think you know.
Correct. There's a lot more that we don't. So
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
that.
So being curious about that is probably the best general approach I would say, and that avoids maybe having to escalate things later. But then the second part is when you sense that something is wrong, don't assume it's going to get right by itself. Okay, we're very close to the end here, and just like to ask for any feedback you have. How can you actually, what's one thing that each of you can take away from this, if you wouldn't mind, coming off the mute and sharing something you would take away to be able to apply in your own role in your own life, and then think about how this might apply and share with your colleagues and with me what you would do with this information.
I'll share more quickly. To me, increasingly in all aspects of my life, these processes, these insights are very relevant. In me being more joyous, in me being getting better outcomes of all my efforts, having clear communication, asking for clarity in my coaching sessions and stuff. So like, don't assume, ask. That's my takeout.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think from my experience, I would say clarity on the rules of engagement, without being, overbearing about it or saying, this is why we need this, or, just whittling it down to the basic points of what we're doing and ask if there are any questions.
I agree, and it is important to be seen as potentially overbearing if you're changing your way of operating and people are not sure where this is coming from. So again, as a leadership coach, I advise people if you're going to try something new as a manager, put your cards on the table. Don't leave people guessing about why you're doing something new. And you can assume positive intent from others. They may not assume positive intent from you, right? And so I think your point is very well taken, Louise. That you don't want to be overbearing. And if it sounds like you're making a shift in how you're managing this kind of complexity, be clear about why you're doing it. and say, I want to make sure everybody is, not to put words in your mouth or anybody's mouth, but from my mouth would be, I want to make sure we're setting everybody up for success at the beginning. And we've had some cases where I don't think I've done that very well. Take ownership for the part that you're responsible for if there was a lack of clarity and you maybe contributed to that in the past. And say, I don't want to do that again. I want to avoid those problems and prevent them. And so we're going to try something a little different.
I like that whole concept, but we're setting somebody up for success. I think that works.
Yeah, and especially if it's authentically true. If it's not, people will see right through it immediately. Right? Yeah, authenticity. Anyone else got a comment?
I think you had it in the slides, but the key takeaway too, you can't hold somebody accountable for something they didn't agree to. So I mean, I that's listening more than talking, and coming to an agreement, being willing to shift and adjust. And on the other side, hey, if you're going to add something, something's going to go away, from requests that you receive. So and give both. Understand that hey, each individual has limited kind of capacity to take on certain tasking and adjusting as things change.
Yeah.
Um, yep.
Yeah, being flexible. Right.
And
Great.
definitely want to check out the books that you recommended as well. So.
Okay. Yeah. Just I'll repeat those. I won't go back to the slide. Language in the Pursuit of Happiness, Leadership Excellence, and Language in the Pursuit of Leadership Excellence. Keyword being language in both of those. I would start with Language in the Pursuit of Happiness. That's the book that one of my coaches recommended to me, and I didn't take her advice right away, and I wish I'd taken it sooner. So in summary, why is it hard? It's hard because sometimes we expect accountability without actually understanding consequences, and because we don't always make clear requests and we don't always have clear agreements, even if we think we do. And there are ways to do it better using some of the tips that I've described. So I would say thanks for your attention. I appreciate everybody's participation. We didn't have a big group, but we had an engaged group, and that's what really matters to me. I really appreciate your attention, your contribution, your engagement. Um, I'm not using this forum to troll for clients, but I am a professional leadership and career coach. I work for a company called Delta Leadership down here in North Carolina when I don't have individual private clients. And if any of you would be interested in discussing coaching, you have my contact information right there. Okay?
Yes, thank you, Mark. That's been, I found that exceptionally important topic. Too often we don't talk enough about it, even in this forum. So hopefully people will hear more about it and pay more attention. So we appreciate your time and thank you for being our speaker and attendees, Louise, Mark, thank you very much. Louise actually happens to be on our board member, and it's very nice of her to be here, uh, and great to know Mark. So hopefully we'll connect more with Mark in the future. So with that, we'll close this session and have a great evening, everyone.
Good. Thank you.